Telling a story through hints and small bits of information spread here and there is getting more and more popular nowadays. It's been in video games for quite a while. Super Metroid's environmental storytelling is a great example, but other games experimented with other means of indirect storytelling even before that. This approach got somewhat overlooked in the past, but today a lot of game writers approach their stories that way. The craft is still maturing. Some succeed, others less so. But I would argue no one did it better than Tom Happ in his labor of love, Axiom Verge. In this video, I will tell you what we know about the incredible world of Axiom Verge. I'll include the events of both games and everything leading to them. I derived my data from both games and Tom Happ's personal blog. I'll present to you both confirmed information and speculative theories with varying levels of credibility. I'll try to make it clear when I'm telling you something confirmed and when I'm hypothesizing. Of course, every analysis of an unusually told story is bound to show some personal bias, so please be mindful of that. First, let's go through the timeline of the events. In relevant moments throughout the video, I'll visualize said timeline at the bottom of the screen. The story starts way back in the past, in the world where the second game of the series takes place. Said world is called Kiengir. Afterwards, we'll switch for a short while to our Earth, and after that, we'll go back to Kiengir in order to follow the events of Axiom Verge 2. The events from the first game take place quite a long while after those from the second one. How long exactly, we are not entirely sure, but a rough estimate would be at least a few hundred years, judging by how many terrible events befell a certain society. Throughout this video, I'll display info cards like these ones at the right hand corner of the screen. I've chosen a dozen key characters and slightly more terms and places to describe, lest you forget their role in the story. You can skip reading the cards if you remember the subject they are related to. I'll often display text sources of information relevant to the topic at hand. If you see notes from one of the two games, text from Tom Happ's blog, Wikipedia or somewhere else, feel free to not read them. They are being displayed solely to showcase where I drew my intel from. Treat them as a science document citations. And before we go back to the main topic, I'll take time to make one last note. This video is a heavy one. By its nature, it's an informational distillate. In other words, in the span of an hour, I'll bombard you with information. An editorial goal of mine was to make the video as concise as possible without missing anything of importance. Watching it wouldn't feel as if you're watching a movie, it would rather be like reading an encyclopedia. Feel free to rewind to a previous section or outright stop for the day and take some time off before returning on the next day. Timestamps should help you easily get back where you left off. To start the story, we need to go back in time and meet with one of the earliest known civilizations, Sumer. They actually did not call themselves that though. The term Sumerians is derived from the Akkadian name for the civilization in question. The Sumerians called themselves Sagigga, or in other words, the black-headed ones. They called their lands Kiengir. We are not really certain what the proper pronunciation is, but the meaning is known to be country of the noble lords. Some interpretations would translate it as the land of the gods. It is not clear what is the connection between our Sumerians and the civilization from Axiom Verge 2, calling itself Sagigans and living in Kiengir. There are multiple possible explanations. Either Kiengir is an alternative image of Earth, or we are witnessing convergent evolution in motion in parallel worlds. Maybe our ancestors found a way to travel to another world where they settled and called it Kiengir, or they were transported there by other beings. Each of these interpretations is valid, since we do not have a definitive proof for or against them. We know from various notes in the second game that Hengir and our world are child worlds to Ansur. What that actually means is a subject to many interpretations, but the most common understanding is that the so-called child worlds are somehow simulated by the main world. The Sagigans themselves use the analogy of fruits birthed by a tree. To move this story forward, just imagine a computer simulation, although it is not necessary that the simulation is done by a computer. It's possible that it's done by means completely foreign even to our imagination. We could even suspect that our ancestors have had contacts with their creators from Ansur in one way or another, and the stories that describe divine manifestations are accounts for that. In contrast to our reality, for Kiengir, we could be completely sure of that. In the distant past, the Udug started appearing there by portals. Udug are a race of which we know very little, and the only things we know come from written accounts from that period. We don't know what they looked like, neither what their purpose was. There are three beings in Axiom Verge 2 called Udug Hull, Udug Polyp and Udug Might. The names are derived from the files describing those creatures and not from within the game, so take that with a grain of salt. Despite the similar names, we cannot affirm that those are the same Udug that opened the portals. The word Udug actually is Sumerian, and the closest equivalent we have is demon. Considering that, those three might just be random non-related creatures that just happen to be classified as demons, or just any other creatures that happen to be from the world of Udug. The only information that we have for the invaders is that they appeared through portals and they had little care where they opened them. They hadn't come to conquer and they didn't pay too much attention to the Sagigans. Their portals, for reasons that I'll explain later, cause harm to Sagigans if opened too close to them. Initially the Sagigans tried to shrug it off, but we have written evidence that they went to war with Udug provoked by the Lamassu, the master builder and the messenger from Ansur. It's not clear how Ansur got into contact with Kiengir initially, nor is it clear what the Lamassu's actual role is. However, in a note, journal entry Dangerous Ideas, written by Radlogal, which means a servant of the kings in Sumerian, it is said that the Lamassu was left there by gods long since dead to ensure their edicts are being followed. Lamassu had told the Kiengir blacksmiths how to build weapons, but hadn't explained to them how they actually worked. Notes from the past show that some people were very positive towards Lamassu and some were suspicious. But regardless of the diverging opinions, Sagigans went to war with Udug. Initially the Udug cared little for Sagigans' attempt to deal with them, but later on they started counterattacking by using their portals, which Sagigans described as storm bombs. But in order to tell you how teleportation between worlds work, I need to explain how the multiverse of Axiom Verge is structured. By putting together the clues and notes found in the games and Tom Hub's philosophical blog, we've managed to derive the following explanation. Let's start with the word reality. That's an algorithm that operates on a set of data. All possible algorithms exist. Any algorithm giving rise to cognitive entities will be perceived as reality by the entities described. Let's imagine a computer simulation which describes a man with every minute detail, biological structure, cognitive processes, etc. Everything that makes us human. The man doesn't know he's in a computer. He just reacts to the world around him like you or I. On the other hand, we know his computer code and could track all his potential actions without even using the computer. We just need to track the entire code and all its variations manually. It might take us years or even decades to write it all down by hand, but eventually we will be able to determine the output, just as if we use the computer for this. Where is his conscious process happening then? We figured out what the result was, but did his actual thinking process happen on the paper? Say that we have been tracing our simulated human for a while now, executing the code on paper. We've stacked dozens of libraries full of paper. However, one of them accidentally burns down. If his consciousness is tied to the paper, did the simulated person die? Was his consciousness erased from existence? What if we had multiple copies and only one of them burned down? Is the man dead in that case? Was his consciousness erased? Is this even the same person? If we decided to retrace the code and recover the computations continuing from the backup, will there be any difference for the person in the simulation? He won't even know that there was a library, let alone that it caught fire. It's almost like his consciousness is a separate thing from our computation, which our tracing of the code lets us watch like a movie. But whether we trace it or not, it still occurred. Do we even need to have written the code at all? Before the advent of computers, mathematicians developed written models such as Turing machines and lambda calculus to run programs. While it may seem that the computer is somehow imbuing programs with life, making them real by sending electrons through complex physical logic gates, to a human described in such a program, there is no difference. Let's replace all variables in our simulation with every possible number in countless iterations. Eventually we'd arrived at a working code for our simulated human and to all possible other worlds. Some of them will have simulated beings that observe it, and the others wouldn't. But like our example simulated human, these worlds all seem real to those observers, whether or not we go through the exercise of generating the values. Furthermore, in computers and Turing machines, algorithms themselves can be replaced in memory as numbers or symbols. So we could use this to trace all possible algorithms with all possible variables just by plugging in every possible value. Any observers described by these algorithms may each consider theirs to be the real universe. Tom Hupp calls the combination of an algorithm and starting variables a reality, because all possible variations of these exist and will be perceived as real by any observer that they describe. The word universe encompasses all of space and time, but that applies only to our very own specific kind of reality. And since the word multiverse is associated with the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which is still specific to our particular kind of universe, Tom Hupp chooses to call this agglomeration of infinitely many different realities the omniverse. It might be hard to imagine that a simple algorithm is a world as real as ours without needing something outside of the system to create it, so here's an analogy. It's true that 222 plus 204 is equal to 426, whether or not anyone ever adds those two numbers together. Similarly, it's true that if x is not different from 2301, then it's equal to 2301, whether or not anyone ever made that observation. So likewise, it's true that with all laws of physics and its starting values, you get our universe and you still watching this video. And that is irrespective of whether we are a part of a computer simulation where someone traces the code of our reality or not. Realities exist as separate bubbles in the omniverse. Don't imagine that these bubbles have physical borders. I just don't have a better analogy. The omniverse contains within it all possible realities, and they are connected or separated, depending on how you interpret it, by the breach. The breach is a volatile space-time anomaly that somewhat resembles its neighboring realities. It is not clear whether or not the breach itself is a reality very similar but still different enough to its nearest realities. It's also unclear if there is just one breach or if there is an infinite amount of breaches that connect the infinitely many realities. For now, let's limit our understanding to the fact that the breach surrounds each reality and it could be used to travel from one reality to another. And that is precisely how Udug traveled from their world, Engur, to Kiengir of the Sagigans. They went through the breach, opening holes in reality. The Sagigans described the breach as a storm, the impact of which hurt them. Because of its instability, it is dangerous for, let's say, almost all Sagigans nearby. When Udug actually started to fight back, Kiengir started to lose the war and the Sagigans resorted to Lamassu for help. He then gave them the tools to fight the Udug, called the Apocalypse Arms, or briefly the Arms. These arms are actually human consciousnesses extracted from the person and imbued in those tools. The arms were always given to the so-called wielders. How were they chosen? Were they trained for that role? We don't know. With this new technology, the Sagigans managed to make a push and intrude Udug's world, Engur. There they established a base with the technology given to them by Ansur, and they called it Zyutsudra. Ansurites were working on a new super weapon called Siuna, to once again propel the Sagigan war efforts to victory. However, Zyutsudra got sieged by Udug, who were one step away from victory. At this point, Lamassu did something outside of the realm of understanding of the Sagigans, and after that, all the Udug just vanished without a trace. The war was over. It didn't bring peace to the Sagigans though. The Lamassu ordered all of the wielders to destroy their arms and to kill themselves because in times of peace their powers are a threat to society. Despite that the loyal to the Lamassu followed the orders, the others rebelled led by Magishketil and his arm Amashilama. They spread doubt that the Lamassu ever intended to end the war. On the contrary, they believed that its orders caused conflict after conflict to help the colonization efforts of Ansur. At that point in time, new characters entered the scene, the pattern minds from Ansur. They are people who have a higher understanding of the true nature of the universe. They could read the primordial code of the algorithm which describes them and could affect it. In other words, to shape the world around them. It is not clear whether they were called by Lamassu to help his efforts to rid Kiengir from the wielders and arms after the war, or if they had been in contact with Kiengir earlier than that. It's immediately clear though that they managed to quickly establish control over Zyutsudra and took over its governance from the Sagigans. The rest of the wielders tried to hide their arms and scrambled. Some of them who were able to go through the breach did that in order to save themselves. Here ends the detailed overview of the conflict between Sagigans and Udug. In time, the Sagigans migrated to Zyutsudra, which later on they called just Sudra. Whether that's something they wanted to do or if they were forced by Ansur to leave Kiengir, we do not really know. We know that afterwards the priesthood of the Sagigans managed to take over the control of Sudra from the pattern minds. We'll go back to them later on, but for now, let's go back to the next key location in our story, the Earth. In the year 2005, in the state of New Mexico, Dr. Trace Eschenbrenner and Dr. Elizabeth Hammond have been doing some kind of research. A frozen valve caused an explosion and Trace was severely injured. For months he laid bedridden and blind in a hospital. While he was in this state, he had an epiphany about the true nature of the world. With the help of Dr. Hammond, he wrote his theory of everything. His fellow colleagues started mocking Trace, calling him Athetos, or in other words, someone that has no place, or someone whose opinion is to be disregarded. Due to his discoveries, Trace managed to travel to Sudra. There he got to know the Sudran Society, which is the new name that the Sagigans living in Sudra adopted. He used one of their rebirth chambers to heal himself from the consequences of the explosion. After he had gotten more familiar with Sudran technology, he determined that it would be way too dangerous to introduce our society to it. He and Dr. Hammond traveled to Sudram many times. During one of his visits, Trace saw something horrible. It's not clear whether it was the leftovers from the Udug War, or some evidence for the Wielders and Arms cleansing, or possibly something related to the rebellion that led to the Sudran priesthood overtaking the Pater Mines from Mansur. The only thing we know is that Trace then decided to go upstream to Ansur in search of answers. The stream is how Trace describes the structure of the Omniverse. A world simulates many other worlds, which themselves simulate their own worlds, and so on. The stream flows and branches down. It's not immediately clear if he came up with that idea in the hospital or if it's understanding that he adopted from the Sudran diagrams. But it's a fact that his explanation is consistent with the way that Sudrans describe the structure of the world. In the year 2007, Dr. Hammond went from Sudra back to Earth, and driven by Trace's discoveries, she created the Ansible. The Ansible is an instant communication device. The games do not tell us how it functions exactly, but soon after its discovery, zero latency computing became the norm and Hammond Corp became a household name. At some point in time, Hammond lost contact with Trace and started looking for him. She spent vast amounts of Hammond Corp's money to fund the search and even built a base in Antarctica. In 2053, an entire research unit led by Dr. Hammond herself disappeared without a trace. Pun not intended. In time, Hammond Corp almost went into bankruptcy without their leader. In this point in time, Indra Chaudhary enters the scene. Indra is a key character in this story. Initially a founder and president of Globetree Conglomerate, she buys a majority share at the Hammond Corp. When Indra fires the first Ansible, which was a part of the deal, she instantly receives a message which says that if she wishes to ever see her daughter again, she has to go to Antarctica. Indra hadn't been in communication with her daughter for a long time now due to strained relationships. Yet she decides to take the call and go to the abandoned Jones station, the same station where the entire team of Hammond Corp researchers had gone missing. In the base itself, Indra finds a portal leading to Kiengir. She uses it but quickly realizes that it only works one way. Without a way to go back, she decides to explore the place. In an underground gallery near the portal, Indra hears a call for help. In search for the source, she finds herself on a collapsing bridge and falls down in an underground lake. Just before she drowns, Indra realizes that the voice comes from an urn barred behind an iron fence inaccessible to her. Indra dies in the underground lake but is recreated by Amashilama, whose voice she heard earlier. Amashilama is an arm created for a war fought long ago. Just between us, she was the arm of the rebel leader that later tried to overthrow the Lamasu. That's how Indra inadvertently becomes a wielder. Indra realizes that she is not alone in this strange place. In search of a way out, she finds a Hammond Corp base. The only survivor, Malka, explains to Indra where she is and tells her a word or two about the current situation. The portal was used for cargo shipments, but it's currently malfunctioning, hence why it works just one way. The few survivors are working on a portal back to Earth, but she doesn't harbor hopes about them succeeding. The rest of her crew members were all killed by the machines of the locals, whose ruins look very similar to the Mesopotamian ruins on Earth. However, the carbon dating showed that the ruins here are a few hundred years more recent. How is this possible is a question that troubles not only Malka, but us, the fans of the series too. The entire time Indra is being guided by Dr. Hammond through the Ansibles she finds in Hammond Corp's facilities. After she leaves Malka in the base at Mount Ebbing's foothills, Indra meets Warren at the observatory on the peak of the mountain. He tells her their work on the way back was interrupted. The portals have been based on the original series of Ansibles, and their only copy of those was stolen by the Kazakhs. Hammond Corp had kept their discovery of Kiengir and their work on it highly confidential, but researchers from the Kazakh station on Antarctica, Sagimbayev, managed to find about their findings and through blackmail got access to Kiengir. Afterwards, they managed to strike multiple deals with Hammond Corp, one of which is very diligently documented. It has to do with the disassembling and smuggling of a few submarines through the Fright Portal. They are not as relevant to this story though, so let's go back to the Ansible stolen by the Kazakhs. It's not completely clear what's their reason for stealing the Ansible, but let's say that they tried to use the Hammond Corp research team's unenviable state to their advantage. On her way between the facilities, Indra finds a bunch of other arms and becomes their wielder. One of them is Damu. He is a little child who is one of the victims of an experimental way to make arms from kids instead of adults. Damu exists in the form of a drone and he is able to go through the breach. That opens new possibilities for Indra, but it also makes her the perpetrator of the infecting of Hammond Corp's team with an unknown pathogen. Damu is the virus carrier. We are not entirely sure what's its source, whether it's somehow connected to the breach or if it's something entirely different. But we are sure that Damu is what causes people to get infected. After you take him, the game is programmed so that even if a single pixel of Indra's or Damu's sprites overlaps with the sprite of someone else, the other person gets infected with a pathogen and sooner or later mutates into a hideous creature called Protozedur. We'll get there later on, but I'm mentioning this now just because it will be relevant moving forward. At this point in time, Kiengir is full of drones. After some time spent wandering, Indra manages to find the Lamasu and asks for it to explain the situation. It says that the drones aim to clean Kiengir and to prevent contamination of other worlds. It's not immediately clear what contamination we are talking about. It most probably is one of two things. Either cultural contamination due to Lamasu's and Ansur's interference in Kiengir's internal matters, or something more literal, caused by the contact with Udug or Damu's pathogen. It's not that important to the wider picture why exactly the Lamasu restricted the way out of Kiengir. The consequences of this decision are what concerns the main characters of the story. On their way to the Kazakh base, Amashilama manages to trick Indra into using a device that allows the arm to take control of its wielder's body, and the consciousness of Indra is transferred to Damu's drone body. In the upcoming events, Indra finds out what Amashilama's end goal is: to destroy Ansur, driven by malice for what the intrusion of Ansur in Kiengir's internal matters brought to them. She believes that destroying the parent world will free the child world from its influence. Indra has every reason to believe that the destruction of Ansur will mean destruction for all its child worlds. Her goal immediately shifts from escaping Kiengir to getting her body back and stopping Amashilama. In the abandoned Kazakh base, Indra discovers a portal to yet another world. It's quite different from Kiengir, even at first glance. It hosts creatures she has never seen before. The environment actually looks very much like Sudra, the same that Trace visits. I will tell you more about it in the latest chapters of this story. We do not have a confirmation if this world is actually part of Sudra, but it's far from impossible that this is the case. There, Indra meets Zhansaya Kurshunova, also known as Drushka. Drushka is the leader of the Kazakhs who have transferred their operations to this strange world that they called the Emergence. The reasons being that it suddenly emerged when they experimented with the stolen Ansible. Zhansaya shares that Amashilama attacked the Kazakh team in her search for a way to Ansur. That's why they are hiding behind a wall when Indra finds them. Drushka is not really surprised that Indra's soul has been separated from her body. She tells Indra that this is actually one of her research team's goals. The Kazakhs have found yet another interesting thing. Time runs slower in this world. In the room behind them there is a border called the Time Valve. It's a door to another world where the time flies faster relative to the emergence. Residing here, they could monitor the natural evolution and the technological development of the people in the other world. Drushka shares with Indra one last fact. To the east of the abandoned Kazakh base, there is a building that is mind-bogglingly advanced technologically. Kiengir was not alone, she says. On her way to the base, Indra manages to find a new arm that gives her access to a humanoid, albeit mechanical body. She manages to face Amashilama, who still controls her own body. From her words and the conversation with Lamasu immediately after, Indra understands that Amashilama is in search of a Siuna, one of a series of ancient superweapons developed as a plan B for the war with Udug. Imagine biological mech suits. I don't have a better comparison. Only one of the Siunas developed was ever in use, but the entire series was scrapped because they were considered too dangerous to use. The entire batch had been scheduled for destruction by the Lamasu, but it never followed through with that decision. Indra manages to reach the highly advanced base, and indeed, her expectations are blown out of the water. There she finds an egg-like machine and enters it. That's actually a rebirth chamber, the same type of machine that Trace uses to heal himself from the consequences of the explosion. For one reason or another, the machine transports her to a hyper-modernistic building or maybe even another dimension. It is not completely clear what's going on. My hypothesis is that the rebirth chambers copy the consciousness and could transport it to another body or even to another algorithm. But let us keep this topic for later on. Using a powerful terminal found there that lacks the restrictions of the Ansibles, Indra manages to connect with her daughter and Dr. Hammond. They give her a pretty vague explanation of the situation, believing that Indra is not fully prepared to hear the truth. Let me explain it quickly. Both Hammond and Indra's daughter are dead. The consciousnesses of the dead continue to exist after their demise and are copied from our reality, in other words the algorithm describing us, to a utopian algorithm, call it heaven if you want, where they continue to exist. Although we are not completely sure what the Lamasu has done in its fight against Udug, we know that it changed the flow of consciousnesses in a way that interrupts it. That led to the consciousnesses being unable to go to this afterlife algorithm and being held in some kind of detention center instead. With the help of Indra's nanotechnology, Hammond manages to take control of the terminal and to remove whatever throttles the process. The stream of consciousnesses is restored, and Indra could continue on with her main mission. Because this chapter of the game ends as suddenly as it began, some of the less attentive players might have overlooked it. It cannot be overstated how important it actually is for the entire omniverse of the game. Without Hammond's and Indra's intervention, all deceased people from each of the worlds simulated by Ansur would have gone to this temporary data container and eventually would have started being wiped when it reached its capacity. So basically, we all owe them a drink. Indra most probably acknowledges what I just told you when she finds Hammond's dead body with a goodbye note soon after those events. A body that has been dead for a while. Despite it not wanting to cooperate earlier on, the Lamasu shifts its priorities and proceeds with a directive that aims to stop Amashilama. It and Indra manage to find her in an alien base, but unfortunately she already has gotten access to a Siuna by then. Now the only thing left for her to do is to open a portal to Ansur. Lamasu and Indra resort to a desperate measure: to activate a bomb, to close the entire sector and to destroy it. In a final confrontation against Amashilama's new Siuna body over the control of the aforementioned bomb, Indra almost loses, but to rescue her unexpectedly comes, well, Indra. After Amashilama ceased to need the old body of Indra, she ditched it. A part of Indra's consciousness, or maybe an alternative version, or a copy of it, is still left in there. This version of Indra in her original body comes to aid the new Indra. She manages to just barely escape from the explosion, all the while the Lamasu confirms the destruction of the portal. Now only a pattern mind could reopen it. The body that Indra's left with is the mechanical one. Her original body is destroyed due to the explosion. Not sure even who she is at this point, she finds herself a new purpose and dedicates her efforts to finding Damu a new body and bonding with Drushka in the process. Indra renames herself to Ophelia. That's a hypothesis and is not yet confirmed by the author, but there are plenty enough hints for it and I feel it's substantiated. In the meantime, the consciousness of Indra's original body is transitioned to the afterlife algorithm where she rejoins with her daughter. Let's allow ourselves some tears of joy before we continue with the truly messed up continuation of the story. There's a period of time that happens after the events of the second game, but before the events of the first game. We could judge what happened then only by documents or dialogues. We know that Ophelia, Drushka and some of the rest of the Kazakhs somehow transformed into the machines we know from Axiom Verge 1 as the Rusalki. It's possible that the key to this lies in the consciousness transition that Indra goes through. It may be in her mechanical body or the submarines that Hammond Corp smuggled to the Kazakhs. After all, in Slavic languages Rusalki means mermaids, and the mermaids are marine creatures. Why would they name themselves that otherwise? The strange machine in the Emergence might be a prototype of the Rusalki, who describe themselves as battle machines. We could only hypothesize. After that, they travel to Sudra. Was their goal? We are not sure. It's possible they did it in their attempt to reach Ansur for some reason or another. After their arrival to Sudra, the Rusalki are seen fighting in the skies by the local population. The reason is once again unclear, but there are written testimonies of Sudrans from the first game. It is not clear how the events unfold after that. There are two main hypotheses in the Axiom Verge community. I'll describe to you both in detail so that you could decide which one you believe. In the end of the video, I'll share with you my thoughts on the matter. According to the first hypothesis, the next key event is the returning of the original trace from upstream. We'll call him Athetos from now on. He confronts the Sudran priesthood, angry that they disregarded their technical progress and indulged in superstitions. He releases a pathogen with which he will eventually kill all of the Sudrans. The Rusalki confront him because of his deeds. On the brink of their inevitable demise, the Sudrans decide that the Rusalki are the only ones that could save them and give them access to their old machines. In other words, the Ansurite technology from the time of the Udug War. The Rusalki are unable to save the Sudrans though, and they all die. One of their mass graves could be witnessed near Abzu. Athetos then runs to the breach attractor and activates it. The breach surrounds Sudra, attracted by the magnet. The Rusalki are trapped on Sudra now, since they will be severely damaged if they try to cross the breach, hence Athetos is safe near the breach attractor. There he is attached to a life support system. Whether because he is still ill from the pathogen or was somehow damaged by it, it's unclear. He starts creating his clones, which somehow transform into the bosses of the first game. The mutated form is very similar to the non-playable characters from Axiom Verge 2 that turned into protozoars soon after getting in contact with Indra and Damu. Hence why it's reasonable to believe that somehow their mutation is under Ophelia's control. Despite everything, Athetos stays in the safety of the breach attractor. The energy reserves of the Rusalki are slowly depleting. Their bodies begin to decay due to the lack of energy for the repair drones. The entire story would have ended here had it not been for Ophelia's intervention and her plan B. In the registry of the rebirth chambers, she managed to find an old record of the original Trace from his first travel to Sudra. She manages to convince the other Rusalki to make a copy of Trace and with his help try to execute their plan of killing Athetos. We could not be certain if only one copy of Trace was ever made, and it's not all that important. But before we continue with the events of the first game, I should present you with the second plausible interpretation of the events preceding it. According to it, Athetos never returned from Ansur. This hypothesis states that the High Priestess of the Sudrans decided to use the breach attractor to pull the breach around Sudra and thus trap the Rusalki. Angered by this, Ophelia released the pathogen against them. It is not completely clear how the Rusalki managed to control and channel what Damu did to the non-playable characters from the second game in order to turn him into a biological weapon, but he is the main suspect. We also cannot be certain if Ophelia announced that she infected the Sudrans in order to blackmail the High Priesthood, or if she did hide that in order to be able to earn their trust in a moment of weakness. But when it's all said and done, the High Priestess Ashinima gives the Rusalki the control over the old machines. Not unlike the other alternative version, this does not help them at all. Sudrans still die from the pathogen in the end. After taking control over the Ansurite technology, the Rusalki use it to make a copy of Athetos because he is a pattern mind. How do they exactly know about his nature is not completely clear. It could be something simple, like the rebirth chambers keeping track of whether someone is a pattern-minded individual or not. Maybe it's inductive thinking that led her to those conclusions after seeing all the messages between Trace and Hammond back in the second game, while she was still in Drachot-Hari. The reason the Rusalki need a pattern mind is that they want to reach Ansur themselves. At this point in time, Athetos realizes what they did to get where they are now. Most probably one of the Rusalki, Katrahashka, told him that Ophelia is the one that released the pathogen. And that is the reason why Katrahashka lays destroyed and is being called a traitor by the rest of the Rusalki in the first Axiom Verge game. Athetos makes his own clones in order to fight his mechanical enemies. These clones are subsequently infected by Damu's pathogen administered by Ophelia, and that turns them into the bosses we fight in the game. Athetos himself is able to flee to the breach attractor, where he is safe from the Rusalki due to the breach that surrounds him. There he starts playing the waiting game for the energy reserves of the Rusalki to deplete. That's about to happen, but then in desperation the Rusalki accept Ophelia's plan to create a new clone of Athetos with altered memories and Katrahashka's nanogates, which Ophelia took from her after she was murdered. But what are the nanogates exactly? They are some kind of microscopic biomechanical technology that for one reason or another is a part of the Rusalki structure. The nanogates have communication properties. This is how Rusalki communicate between them despite the distance, and that is how they communicate with Trace, who got implanted with Katrahashka's nanogates. Despite that, in the game we find messages that the Rusalki sent to one another by alternative means. It's most likely that they do it to keep their communications secret from other users of the network, for example Ophelia or Katrahashka. Also, when Trace dies, we see an animation with red dots that fly towards the closest rebirth chamber. It is highly likely that these are his nanogates, which carry a copy of his consciousness to the nearest egg in order to revive him. This allows the Rusalki to be able to keep track of Trace and to get him in line when he demonstrates insubordination. No matter which hypothesis you decide to believe, here starts the first game. In the very beginning, one of the Rusalki, Elsenova, is the only one in communication with Trace. Due to her limited energy supply, her messages are short and sparse. She guides him to take the Axiom Disruptor, the main weapon of the game. She misleads him to believe that the Rusalki found him in his own world because they needed the help of a pattern mind who only could handle Athetos and stop the breach attractor. In case he succeeds, the Rusalki will be able to return him home, Elsenova tells him. In other words, she lies to him that he is the main protagonist of an isekai anime. In the process, Trace manages to learn a lot about the world he's in. He sees the consequences of the pathogen, the body piles, the Sudran zombies, the ruins of a civilization. He manages to reactivate the so-called power filters. It is not completely certain what their function is. According to Elsenova, they will clean some type of toxin that keeps her in a weakened state. The implication is that it's something that Athetos did to the Rusalki, although it's not explicitly explained by her. It's possible that it's slug that naturally built over time due to the filters being off for a while. After this, Trace manages to reactivate the repair drones. They manage to repair Verushka and he has a short meeting with her, but it does not lead to anything too insightful. He understands that she is a master in creating mind worlds, but this will become relevant a lot later. While searching for Ophelia, Trace sees a double of his a bunch of times, but Elsenova cannot confirm that she sees or is able to track anyone. This makes him understand that he is hallucinating. In time, his visions become increasingly more ludicrous until he eventually faces a hallucinated clone of Athetos. Trace is in the role of the clone and gets to watch how someone else, or maybe him in his own body, is killing him. After murdering this vision, Trace falls unconscious and the repair drones carry his body to Ophelia. While he was unconscious, Trace recollects the bulk of the events that led here. The explosion in the New Mexico lab, how he lay mutilated in the hospital, how he came up with an explanation for the true nature of the world, the article describing the Epiphany, and the rejection from the scientific circles. Trace understands that he himself is Athetos, but decides to keep it secret from the Rusalki, at least for now. He wakes up near Ophelia, who explains to him that he had been infected by the pathogen, but she managed to clean his body from it. She explains what Elsenova said earlier in more detail, that they use a device called Scry to search for pattern minds in all the worlds across the breach. The reason being that only a pattern mind like Athetos could survive the pathogen and use his weapons. Neither Ophelia nor Elsenova admit to anything else, Trace's provocations notwithstanding. While searching for a way to the breach attractor, the scientist finds a lab with rebirth chambers where 2 clones of Athetos reside. They are either not fully realized or undergoing a process of mutation. Elsenova commands him to kill the clones because they could not be saved anyway. Trace rebels and reveals that he knows the truth and doesn't want to continue with the killing. The Rusalki are forced to admit that he is a copy of Athetos from back when he came to Sudra for the first time and used the rebirth chamber. When asked why Trace does not remember his first arrival to Sudra, Ophelia responds that she is unsure and that this is possibly due to data degradation over time. Trace refuses to take part in the killing of Athetos and continues being provocative towards Elsenova. Unable to take it, she shuts his nanogates off, technically killing him. We have a good enough reason to believe that the nanogates of our main protagonist were shut because Elsenova wanted to give the Rusalki a chance to regroup and align their versions. As we hypothesized earlier, if his nanogates were active, the Rusalki would not have been able to communicate quickly and in secret. Trace wakes up in the last rebirth chamber he used just before the conflict. Ophelia revived him and she agrees to his wish to just talk to Athetos and to try and convince him to shut the breach attractor down. She promises that the Rusalki won't kill Athetos despite the crimes he committed and that she will talk to Elsenova and try to reconcile her. Trace agrees to these terms and continues on. After a lot of trouble, he manages to find his way to Mar Uru and from there to Athetos' base. Upon meeting him, Trace asks whether he actually released the pathogen, and after a brief pause, longer than usual, his old and frail interlocutor says yes. When Trace demands explanation, Athetos tells him that if he reveals too much, Trace will end up being killed by the Rusalki, but agrees to explain the situation briefly. Sudra is a portal to another world so mind-bogglingly advanced that the Earth technology looks like sticks and stones in comparison. World without disease, without war. World of endless advancement. The only barrier between mankind and this world was the superstitious society of the Sudran people, which treated its technology as if it was magic and traveling to other worlds as a taboo. Athetos shares that this was his only logical course of action. He sacrifices one people for the benefit of the entire humanity. Trace declines the offer to join Athetos in the fight against the Rusalki, and after a skirmish with his drones, he manages to shut down the breach attractor. Without the breach to stop her, Elsenova flies to the base atop Mar Uru and kills Athetos. Just before he dies, he tells Trace that this couldn't have been avoided and that he shouldn't blame himself for what happened. The Rusalka tells Trace that now she could return him to his world, and despite the objections of the scientist, she puts him to sleep. Despite that the laboratory is still demolished by the explosion, nobody thinks it's strange that Trace is unscathed. The scientist refuses to move on with his life as before. He aims to go back to Sudra and to find out what happened. He puts the entire knowledge he gathered there in use. The final credits track the body of one of the Rusalki, most probably Verushka, and end up with Trace who sleeps in her lap. The most plausible explanation is that he has been physically put to sleep, but his consciousness was transferred to one of her mind worlds, after he managed to do what the Rusalki copied him for. After the credits roll, we witness a final scene where Trace is on the brink of a successful returning to Sudra, but Athetos appears at his doorstep, tells him that it's time to wake up, and draws a gun. Thus ends the story of Axiom Verge up until now. Of course, it's self-explanatory that when a third game is released, or when the author provides more explanatory materials, everything in this video could be proven wrong. After all, it's just an in-depth analysis of the information we have from the first two games, as well as TomHub's personal blog. Before I share with you my understanding of the events that I walked you through, I want to thank the entire fan community of Axiom Verge and to extend extra gratitude to Orloth. Without her immense help, this video wouldn't have looked the way it does right now. I used her notes on a similar video she worked on in the past but ultimately cancelled. She responded to my queries and pesky questions non-stop. She speculated with me and even read the script for this video to help me improve it. I stepped on the shoulders of a giant, as they say, and I'm really grateful that someone as passionate helped me retell the story of one of my favorite game series. With that being said, let's get to the spicy stuff. I'll be brief and I'll focus on the moments where my reading diverges from the widely accepted one. In the first place, I think there's no such thing as a stream made of separate worlds and breach, which is a deadly storm between those worlds. I believe that, including the breach, is all different algorithms. Or in other words, separate realities. The breach, as you could see in the games, is just an unstable alternative of the worlds it surrounds. In my opinion, the breach is just another algorithm with a slightly different values or rules that make it unstable and thus dangerous to people. I base my hypothesis on a gut feeling and some eureka moments from my study of the posts on Tom Hub's blog. The pattern minds are advanced individuals that achieve a more in-depth knowledge of the nature of the world, and this gives them the capability to control reality itself, modifying the so-called primordial code. Highly developed civilizations, and more specifically Ansur, simulate other realities and other civilizations. Their main goal is to lead them somehow to produce their own pattern minds. It's like a parent who mentors their own children to one day become parents themselves. I feel there is a direct connection between simulating realities and the pattern minds, although I cannot point my finger at what this connection is. I think that Trace and the first game are very important, since they are a key event in the history of our own reality. Trace is either the first human that has ascended to the status of pattern mind, or is the one that will help humanity make the step towards parenthood in the sense that I explained earlier. I thought about the possibility that different saints from our religious myths were pattern minds as well, for example Buddha or Jesus, but not exclusively them. In our stories describing religious figures, we have plenty of testimonies of miraculous changes of reality, traveling to other dimensions, etc. Ophelia and the Rusalki aim to reach Ansur for their own benefit. In other words, I believe in the second hypothesis. Sudrans capture them in a trap with the breach attractor. Disgusted by their superstition and rigidity, the Rusalki release the pathogen and wipe their entire civilization. When they get access to the old machines through threats and false promises to the desperate Sudran, the Rusalki make a clone of Trace so that he could free them from the breach, shutting down the breach attractor. However, he somehow sees their true colors and runs from them to his tower in Mar Ur. When he meets his newest clone, Athetos lies to him. The pose he makes just before he admits guilt indicates that. The motives he explains are not his, but actually Ophelia's and other Rusalki's motives. Athetos knows he will die and wants to plant in Trace the seed of anger towards those self-righteous reasons for the genocide of the Sudran people. That's in order for Trace to be able to channel his anger towards the Rusalki when he finally understands the truth about their actions. That's why Athetos' last words for his clone were to not blame himself. The Rusalki transition Trace's consciousness to a simulation built by Verushka, but obviously Trace doesn't fall for this deception and tries to go back to Sudra. I'm not entirely sure what's the case with Athetos, who tells Trace that it's time to wake up, but it's possible that this is another Athetos clone or the original Trace who somehow got access to Verushka's simulation and aims to get the clone Trace back in the action. I'm not entirely sure what the greater context of all of this is though, and I'm eagerly awaiting for the third game to reveal that. I believe that even if it comes and disproves everything in this video, it still would have some merit. It will be a time capsule of how the fan community saw its story when we had only the first two games and how their opinions evolved. I hope this video was interesting to you, but more importantly, I hope you played those games if you still hadn't, or to replay them if you had. You're welcome to speculate with us while you're at it. This is a new channel of mine. I've been doing YouTube for more than 11 years now, but strictly in my native language. This video in particular I've made two versions of, a Bulgarian one and the English one you are watching right now. I decided that it would be more proper to upload the English one on a dedicated channel, and that's how this channel got born. Despite what the Story of Axiom Verge is, please do not expect more story deep dives from me. This is not my thing. I'm a game designer and a gameplay minded individual in general. My goal is to talk about gameplay in depth and as briefly as possible. Each video will follow a specific topic and hopefully will be a satisfying watch for both game devs and dedicated gamers. If you decided to engage with the video or to subscribe to the channel, I extend my gratitude to you. I wish you productive gaming and see you in the next video.